That 1930s guy here from Soldier Field in downtown Chicago. And this field is actually one of the few stadiums that's considered a National Historic Landmark, because it was originally open quite a long time ago, even though it was reconstructed in 2003. Nevertheless, Chicago is a sports town. So I'm going to go over some interesting Chicago sports history. Might venture a little bit beyond 1930s somewhat, but I'm going to try to center it on that at least. But there's a lot of interesting facts that most people don't know about. So stay tuned if you want to hear some good sports history of Chicago. Well, here at Soldier Field, which in case you don't know, is home of the Chicago Bears. It's a very interesting architecture. I mean, it's kind of modern looking, this part of it. But then, there's a large part of it, you can see, it's kind of like Greek columns and very sort of like ancient looking architecture, but almost like museum, like this museum over here, except it's a stadium. But anyway, now the Chicago Bears right now are the only professional Chicago team, but there used to be, well actually they still exist, there used to be a Chicago Cardinals. They moved to St. Louis in 1959, and then eventually they moved on to Arizona. But there used to be a pretty good rivalry of teams here between the Chicago Bears and the Chicago Cardinals. And they didn't really play at Soldier Field much, actually. The Chicago Cardinals were more of a South Side team. They played most of their games at Comiskey Park, especially in the 30s, actually. They were pretty consistently there. And the Bears were a North Side team that played at Wrigley Field most of the time. Again, they didn't always play at these fields, but now Soldier Field, when it originally opened at the beginning of the 1920s, was actually called the Grant Park Stadium. And it didn't last very long with that name. In 1925, they decided to honor the World War I veterans and call it Soldier Field. And it's stuck ever since. I am now at Comiskey Park. Oh, wait a minute. Cellular One Field. No, wait. Guaranteed Rate Field. Yes, those are the three names that this stadium you're looking at has had in the last 20 years or so. But it's a beautiful stadium right in the south side of Chicago. The White Sox now, everyone knows about the big drought that Cubs had not winning the World Series for, I think it was 1908 until 2016. But the White Sox had almost as big of a drought. They went from 1917. Oh, look, it's right here. On there, right on the entrance, it says the 3 years that they won. But until 2005, they didn't even win a since 1959 all the way to 2005. So they actually had a pretty big drought. And the Cubs, I guess they have better marketing maybe than the White Sox, because the White Sox are just as old, almost as old as the Cubs. They've been around the beginning of the American League, and they've had quite a storied history as well. I don't think anyone's playing today. It's a bit snowy, but they're doing work on the parking lots here. It's actually pretty decent parking. I've never been here before for being in such an urban area. But it's a very nice field. It was redone in 2001 or 2, this stadium. In the 90s, they were actually threatening to move the White Sox. They were going to move them supposedly to the Tampa area, where the Devil Rays eventually popped up, I believe, in '99. But the owner was threatening if he didn't get a new stadium, they were going to move to Tampa. So that kind of pressured the city, and they got the money. They built it. They didn't have to switch stadiums while it was under construction because they built it while the season was already going on. They built it right off the old right field, right beyond that. And yeah, it's the stadium you're looking at right there. On our tour of Chicago sports. Last pan here. And here we are, ladies and gentlemen, the world famous Wrigley Field, home of the Chicago Cubs. It's a lot smaller than I expected. Not too many stands. Oh, I'm just kidding. I just had to do it. I saw this name and I said, oh, that's funny. It's a little dog park. Now here's the world famous Wrigley Field. Probably one of the most iconic sports venues in the world. But it's old for sure. Opened in 1914, but it's not the oldest. Fenway Park is a little bit older. Yeah, everyone, whenever they show Wrigley Field, they always show this sign, so I had to start it out right here. But anyway, as we tour around, pretty nice looking. Actually, doesn't look very old from the outside. It's pretty nice. And it's a very Cub-themed neighborhood. Cubs everywhere. But it was originally called Weigman's Field or Stadium, something like that. But Weigman's was the name until 1924. That's when it changed over to Wrigley. And of course, they had to wait all the way till 2016 before they actually saw a championship here. And the Cubs won 1908, but it wasn't here. It was a different place. So, yeah, they had to wait all that time. But, of course, they couldn't have done it in 2015 and proved Back to the Future. It's the second one right when they said the Cubs won the World Series in 2015. But that's okay. But, you know, I think ever since the Cubs won the World Series, they kind of lost their appeal a little bit. Because everyone liked the Cubs because, you know, they felt bad for them. They had to wait so long and they're so dedicated. And I mean, even the pennant, the last time they won before 2016 was in 1945. So, you know, there was definitely a sympathy for Cubs and Cubs fans, but that's all over now. They just recently won. So I think their appeal in that respect is probably over. Of course, there was also that cute story about the goat that everyone loved to say cursed them, but now that they won, I guess there was no curse. As a White Sox fan would say, there wasn't a curse. They just sucked for 100 years. I think I saw that on a shirt somewhere. But it looks like they're building a lot of new stuff, actually. It's interesting. This kind of modern-looking new section doesn't quite fit in very good with the rest of the stadium, in my opinion. But it is kind of neat too, seeing the rooftop stuff, the seats people sell. You see that up there. Interesting palm tree up there somehow. And here we are at the Great United Center building, just west of downtown Chicago, home of the Bulls and the Blackhawks. It was built in 1994. That was the year it opened, at least. Right in the middle of that great Bulls dynasty there. Michael Jordan actually kept the center court section, and he has it in his home in North Carolina. But this replaced the old Chicago Stadium, which is where the parking lot is now. There is some kind of event going on here. Lots of buses and school kids going in. It is a pretty nice arena, very impressive, very big. The old Chicago Stadium was actually state-of-the-art when it was built in 1929. Whoop. And it was called the Madhouse on Madison because it was such a rowdy venue. The Blackhawks being an original 6 team, the furthest west of any of the original 6. And hockey was pretty big here, even back in the 30s. The newspaper, the Blackhawks scores, would always get the front page. And they were a pretty well-liked team here before hockey was really big in many other parts of the country, especially the Midwest. And yes, just north of this is located just north of the medical district, it's called, because there's a bunch of hospitals just to the south of the arena. And just like the Cubs and the White Sox, the Blackhawks actually had a pretty significant drought, championship drought. After the New York Rangers won the Cup in '94, they hadn't won since '40, the Rangers. So that was the longest. But after that, it was the Blackhawks until they won the Cup in 2010. They had the longest drought for 16 years. They hadn't won, I believe 63 was the last time they won before the 21st century. So, Blackhawks still very popular in this town. And I'm going to end this Chicago sports history video with another look at Soldier Field, a different side of it. Very Parthenon looking building. Very imposing from this angle. It is, I don't know, sort of awe-inspiring sort of feel to it. But there's a few things I wanted to mention that I didn't before about the Cubs. In the 1930s, the Cubs actually went to the World Series quite a few times. I'm trying to remember if it was 3 or 4 times. I think it was 4 times in the 1930s that the Cubs made the World Series. Obviously, they didn't win any of them. And the most embarrassing was 1938. They played the Yankees, Lou Gehrig, Joe DiMaggio Yankees, and they got beat so bad. 4 games, and they got destroyed in every one of them. And that was probably one of the most lopsided World Series which ever occurred. And now we're heading to the southern side of Soldier Field. Previously you saw it from the north, and I also wanted to mention about the Blackhawks. Like I said, their arena, when it opened in 1929, was state of the art. It's not only that, it was the biggest indoor sports complex up to that time, and it was really considered a big feat. It's called the Chicago Stadium, but it wasn't outdoors, it was indoors. But at the time, big indoor venues like that weren't too common. So it was. And here is the southern end. And another thing that's kind of interesting about Chicago is the placement of their professional teams where they play. They're all like sort of different sides of the town. You have the south side, Chicago White Sox. You have the north side, Chicago Cubs. On the west side, you got the Chicago Blackhawks. And then you got in the middle, not quite equidistant, but almost equidistant to all of them, is Soldier Field right downtown. There you go. This is, I guess, would be considered the main entrance. So there you go. It has another dedication to the 4 or 5 branches of military service right here, because it is Soldier Field after all. And thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it and learned something about the sports town of Chicago. And if you did enjoy the video, I'd appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.